Hello, my name is Sam Edwards. Today is November the 9th, 2016. Today I'm here with,
Wendy Cross.
and today we're talking about Chroma Technology Corporation of Vermont, her experience here as an employee, the structure, and the organization of the company, as well as we'll be hitting notes of history in the company and talking about that today. Wendy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Wendy Cross, and I'm actually retired founder of Chroma at this point. Um, and
a little closer to the mic?
okay, and
Perfect.
being sort of on the outside right now, I find it really fascinating in how being able to remember what Chroma was like in the beginning and how it's changed. But as I was walking in here today, there's some things that are just still the same. First of all, the smell and the colors, but a lot of people. There are a lot of people that have been here for years, which I haven't found in any other position that I've had. I don't know if you want me to go to the very beginning or.
I mean, as a founder, that would be helpful for the interview,
Right.
because of the people I've interviewed, I mean, newer employees seem to be more readily willing to talk about their experience here, anywhere from 3 to even 10 years.
Right.
But yes, if you want to go back to the beginning and talk a little bit about Omega and how Chroma was started, feel free. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm gonna blank out here. I was not one of the original, I was an original founder, but I was not one of the people who actually decided that Chroma might be a possibility. I came on just a little bit later, actually before the company was incorporated. I worked for Omega Optical probably 5 years, maybe a little more. I did not have any technical expertise like some of the founders did, but I believe I had a lot of practical expertise to do the things that you needed to do to start a company, even if you didn't have a computer, which was pretty amazing. So I was asked to come on and decided I would. I think I, at that point, was the only woman, which we joked about a lot. And again, the fact that I didn't have a computer, I had a typewriter that sort of worked, but we made it work. I think also because I didn't have any actual specific expertise or know-how, that I ended up doing a lot of different things. Whatever had to be done and that someone didn't have time to do. So, I mean, I painted. When we found space, I tried to bring in resources. I tried to figure out how we were going to ship, write up orders, all of the things that I believe a lot of people just didn't think about. You know, you just couldn't wing things out the door. So that also gave me, even though I didn't have a real in-depth knowledge of any of the functions, I think I was exposed to a lot of the different things and needs from different parts of the company as we grew. So my job changed from jack of all trades to whatever we needed, and as people came on that I felt could probably do the job, one of the jobs better than me, and we needed the time, I just kind of left different jobs to someone else who was better at it or had the time to do it or interest in doing it. So in the very end, I ended up being on the board, but also just purchasing manager, which I think my experience in all the different departments helped. I'm not quite sure where to go from here, if you could help me.
Yeah, if you want to talk a little bit about the actual founding, maybe the relationship with Omega to Chroma.
Okay, well, my memory serves me. I'd always had frustrations with Omega, trying to figure out how the employees versus the customers versus the owner, how they interacted and what was most important. I was hired as salesperson, which I was not very good at, but I was good at customer service and solving problems. So that's where I ended up, just kind of moving myself there. Then I guess a number of us started seeing people not being valued, seeing people who worked really hard for the company being fired, and our customers not being serviced. So I think, for me anyway, that's one of the reasons that I decided I would leave. Also, the people that I respected the most were leaving. So then we started our own company. As I said, it was fast in some respects that our customers really wanted us to get going so that we could supply them with what they really wanted, but slow in other areas. I mean, money was an issue. Who did what was an issue. And I honestly don't remember if employee ownership was an issue in the very beginning, because there were so few of us.
Mm-hmm.
And we all equally bought in. But I do remember that Paul, after a while, started seeing that that's probably the way we should be able to organize ourselves, considering we were friends, we were co-workers, we were people that respected each other. So how do you decide who owns the company and who doesn't? And also bringing in outside money was an issue, and we decided that that probably wasn't a good option, because then you're beholden to whoever's investing in your company and not in what you really believe in. So money would come first before actually producing a good product and taking care of each other. I think working at Omega, I had a false sense in the beginning of, yes, employees are important. And then I started realizing that we were encouraged to believe that, we were all responsible for the company's good or the company's health. But in the end, we weren't benefiting from it. There was only one person, actually, that was benefiting from it. And so that really struck me the wrong way.
So I've heard peripherally that one person, the owner of Omega, that there was some involvement or thinking of turning Omega into employee-owned. I'm not sure if that's true or not. Do you remember anything about that?
It may be true. I don't remember any real discussions on how that would happen. I think he was trying to find a way to do it, but still maintain control. So it didn't seem like it was going to go anywhere. He did hire a number of people to come in and do workshops, and can't remember what to call them, but they were supposedly had different workplace experience in trying to bring people together and organize work. But when it didn't fit in what the owner believed in, they were let go. And I sort of remember that happening with the employee ownership thing. The tools that he would be given just didn't fit what he wanted to do. So it was more or less how you perceive something and then the reality, and we were kind of stuck in the middle, and it kept changing. As an example, one time I remember working on a project and with someone along these lines, or with a group of people, and we were actually very excited that we could really make something work. And the owner sat and listened. He told us to start this project and come up with solutions, and at the end of it looked at us and said, "This is not what I envisioned." Squash. So no discussion. We didn't come up with his vision, his plan. So again, it was kind of, nothing was real. And for me, I think that was one of the things that I wanted to see in Chroma. No matter which way we went, it had to be real. It had to be, I hate the word transparent, but...
Why? I mean, listen, at least in this case.
Well, the word itself I just see thrown around in too many instances, and it really doesn't mean what the user says it means. But yeah, transparency, I think, was, if I use that word, very important. And I wanted...
Insofar as management and ownership?
Management, ownership, also honesty about what each one of us really was trying to accomplish, or what the company was trying to accomplish. You know, not just the public view and the personal view. And I was hoping that we could all think, you know, we could all respect that we may not all have the same views, but I'd be able to voice my opinion, et cetera. And that was pretty easy in the beginning, even though there were a lot of confrontations and some people spoke louder than others. I think we all respected that there were other views and that we listened. I think as we started growing, that became more difficult. One of the reasons is because people were more separated even by their jobs or their knowledge of what the business entailed, or we were just more separate. It wasn't just 6 of us, it was even when it became 20 of us.
There was some specialization in certain work groups or areas that...
Some specialization, right.
That didn't lead to, you know, if I'm in this work group, I can't necessarily make decisions about the other work group because our work doesn't even...
Right. Or I made this decision, but I don't really know how it's going to affect decisions on down the line.
Okay.
And it could be a very rational decision for what I'm doing, for what we need, but there could be just one little component that is not going to work with what someone else has decided on down the line, and you have to kind of bring those things together. So when we're smaller, we were all more involved in all of the issues, processes, whatever, and we could say, hey, you don't know what I'm doing here. You know, listen to me, see what I'm doing, and then we'll talk about it.
Were the lines of communication when the company was smaller easier to do? I mean, you know, when there's 6 of you or there's 20 of you, I'm curious in comparing the difficulty level of communicating those kinds of issues that you're talking about with how you grew as a company in terms of numbers of people.
I think, well, for me, they were easier. I don't know about everyone. I mean, we tried all kinds of things. When you're small, you have a little meeting, and then you get a little bit larger, and you have company meetings, and we would do, after a while, we would do a lot of talking, but never come to decisions, which on down the line, oops, I'm sorry, became an issue. I think, again, it was easier to see when we were smaller. It was easier for me to respect other people's opinions than maybe it was later on, because I thought maybe they didn't see the whole picture. You've probably heard that a whole lot, and maybe I wasn't seeing the whole picture. But being small, but also being smaller group, it was more personal. So personal, where you could have arguments that may hurt people's feelings, or that would escalate into something personal instead of just the Chroma issue that we're dealing with. That's always continued. I mean, it's always been there, I think, but not face-to-face like we had before. I guess it's the face-to-face thing that was really important. You had to sit there and talk and look at someone who was hearing you. So now I'm off track again.
No, that's fine, because insofar as looking at the structure of Chroma, communication is something key. At least I've noticed in my time here that there are still struggles with communicating, and sometimes the way the current management structure seems to be forming is also around lines of communication and decision making. So what I've noticed too is that when companies are 5 to 20 people, what you're saying is very consistent with how they experience the organization of their work and the completion of it. And as it gets bigger, how to organize work, how to coordinate work with other people and other work groups, and communicating through that whole cycle. There are difficulties there that I am curious about, because those do go into the history of Chroma and how it formulates itself in the past, now, and in the future.
Right, and being smaller, when we talked about being owners, employee owners, there was, it was really hard to get people, or any of us, me, myself sometimes, in certain instances, to realize that there is a difference between being an employee and being an owner, if we were really trying to think of the company as a whole. And I think probably Chrome is still battling with that to some extent, but people are much further apart now, possibly because of longevity. There are more people here. But even with 50 people, it was hard to separate those two things. And
Wait, are you saying that, go back to how you said that being an employee and being an owner are like two separate things that you're saying, or so how then does that play out in your understanding?
well, in some instances they are two separate things. If I'm in a department and there's something that I really want and I really need for me as an employee, it might not agree with what the company really needs to profit or to move on or whatever. So I'm not saying that they're completely separate,
Mm-hmm.
but that you have to balance those two things. If I decided that, okay, I want to do this way and only this way, and it was going to affect the product or whatever and affect the company's health, I'm not sure if that's the right word to use, maybe my need can't be taken care of or immediately or the way I want it to.
Wouldn't that be consistent with any sort of ownership board, whether it's board or stockholders, that any one stockholder can't necessarily get their way that they want within the company?
I think that's true, but I think that stockholders are looking for the money for themselves. In an employee-owned company, I'm not going to do well unless everyone in the company does well. I think that was one of the issues that, even as far as compensation, was always coming up. So I have to take care of, if I want to take care of me, I have to take care of the company. If you're just a stockholder, I don't know.
And the differentiation I'm making is a stockholder that's also not an employee.
Right. And a stockholder that is not also an employee is only really looking after their interest, I believe. I mean, the way you vote is not, as a stockholder, is not to protect the employees, it has nothing to do with that. It's what you're going to make, what your income is going to be, what you're going to get out of it. So I guess that's where I came from, at the time. But the issue of taking care of the business means that I'm going to be taken care of, and vice versa, and everyone is going to be taken care of, is what was most important to me in the beginning, at least.
So as the company grew in the beginning, and you can look at it before you had 20 people, before you had 50, you can compare and however you want. How did it, the culture of employee ownership inform how people were hired for different positions, what have you? How did the culture of employee ownership kind of inform the development of the company?
I'm not sure if I'm going to be answering your question, but in the beginning we hired friends.
And that's often consistent with employee ownership in
Right.
cooperatives.
Friends or people that we knew or people that we felt would buy into the employee ownership part. We did pay more than a lot of people had been making. The pay scale was pretty flat at that time. There was security. as the company grew, I think we looked more for expertise. So in the beginning, we were training, or the new hires were actually growing with the company, learning their job, learning what was needed, learning about optics.
As evidenced by people who are, have been here for the last 25 or 20 years.
Right, right. I mean, we had people come in, like for Frank, well, he was a chemist, but he was a glass blower. He did have a job in another place doing optics. That's probably one of the things that we did learn from Omega, is that you didn't have to be a degreed or a PhD person to come in and learn the basics.
Mm-hmm.
And then learning from there, some of the people that are here that are just brilliant and do a wonderful job probably didn't even graduate from college. Not to say that college is not good, but it gave people a chance to use their skills and their intellect and whatever. I'm not sure how the process of hiring goes now. I think it's more just, well, I shouldn't say I'm not here anymore, but our Chroma's needs are more specific, and the outside world has come in. There's competition. So the company, where I guess in the beginning we felt we were the best, we were the only ones that could do what we were doing. There was very little competition.
Not even from Omega?
There was, but it didn't last very long. A lot of their customers moved over to us, and they started specializing in things that we didn't deal with. So even though there was a lawsuit and all of that, I didn't see that we were terribly competitive with them.
Can you briefly state what that lawsuit was?
I guess after, I'm not going to remember the timelines or the specifics, but once the owner realized that what we were up to, and that we were incorporated, first he wished people luck in what we were doing. And then when he started realizing that we were selling and actually a real company, he decided to sue, and I think it was, can't remember what the exact suit was. One was a patent, but then it turned out that we owned the patent. One of our employees actually had the patent turned over him and not the owner of that company. And then the rest may have been intellectual property. And the whole lawsuit was very bizarre, where it was claimed that something that was used for hundreds of years in an industry was his property. So it was scary, but it was also funny. It was, and we were lucky that we won. But
From what I understand, his actions were very much reactionary to understanding that you were very competitive in the case of the industry
Right.
you were both in.
Right.
And that most of his claims were not substantial, and in the case of intellectual property, it was after the fact that he realized that you were competitive. Did he try to lock down ownership of the technologies or processes that you were using?
Right. And even materials that other companies were using. He claimed that they were trade secrets, and there were other companies making filters.
Yes. I think specifically his claim of trade secrets that you all were using was part of what went into the lawsuit.
Right. Right. So I was reading the court records when I first left, or the transcripts, and it's a time that I really don't want to remember.
Well, we can move on then. So, when did you can state when Chroma started, and I guess talk about its development through the 90s, and how you were meeting, or some of the challenges you were meeting within the company, and actually its internal organization, and even competition in the larger markets.
Well, I think we were facing the fact again that we were growing, and that our company meetings certainly weren't working.
How were they arranged?
It's hard to remember. They changed. I mean, things were constantly changing as far as. I don't think we ever accomplished anything with our meetings. We were trying to find a way. So the formats changed. There were groups that changed. We had, in the beginning, it was pretty much consensus or one person, one vote for most issues after a lot of talking. But when I try to think about it now, some of it was people who spoke the loudest prevailed.
Was there any attempt to curb how much space they were taking up to get the, I don't know, the silent voices or the other opinions?
I think so. We tried to, there were groups that were started. I'm trying to remember even what they were called. Employee group. I guess one of the things that was happening is we had to decide what issues are decided by what groups or what people or what positions. And that became really difficult. There was, as I said, there were so many different changes in the names of groups and what they were supposed to be doing.
Ironically, that's still happening.
Right. And the perception of what they were supposed to be doing, or you could ask, I could ask in my position, even as purchasing, when I was trying to figure out, okay, where can I make decisions? When should I not make the decisions? Who should I go to get the final say on this because of the process or whatever? And I could go to 6 different people and get 6 different answers. And I think that happened a lot when we were trying to figure out who has the authority to make those decisions. The employee group became kind of, and that's not the official name, became kind of a gripe session, I think. So that didn't really help the overall process. Boy, I think these are probably times that I don't want to remember, so I'm having a hard time with it. The steering committee must have had a different name before that.
Yeah, my understanding of the steering committee is that it's the last incarnation started in around 2005, 2006, and has dissolved in the last year or so. So, I mean, we can move forward from, the initial work. We can even move up to the year that you had retired, and I guess the years previous to that, and what the company was like then.
Okay, well, the company was just constantly changing. I mean, positions were changing. One of the big issues became compensation, and the ratio between, I guess, more by job description, which for years, job description had nothing to do with what you were compensated for. The main thing was your term here, how much time, how many years you put in. Then trying to bring in people from the outside became an issue, where our compensation just seemed ridiculous to them. So
As in too much or too little?
Too little for the upper end and too much for the lower end. And those two ends didn't agree at all, and probably still don't. I think one of the things that we always tried to do from the very beginning is make sure that anyone who worked at Chroma made a livable wage, could support a family, have health care, buy a house, or if they wanted to. And those are all the social things that were really important to me, and I think to a lot of people. I'm not so sure that those social concerns are that important to certain parts of the company any longer. I think if I have them and I benefit from them, they're important to me. But if I'm not benefiting as much. Boy, this sounds like the country. If I'm not benefiting as much for myself because of what we're offering someone else, then I have an issue with that. I mean,
Mhm.
and I'm sure it's still going on. Although most people here, I think, when they think about it, have really good hearts and really understand. To stay here, you have to pretty much understand and appreciate what's going on.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, the comment you made about what you were saying sounds like the country. I mean, the influences we get from political and economic theory, essentially, they've influenced the development of our country and the normative perceptions. If you're this far down on your experience and your wage, you should be paid, as you said, the lower end, and even as now of the tier scale that they have now is higher than market value, and at the top it's still lower than market value. And the impression that we get from the general corporate America and the business in America is that that's not how it should be. It should be very low at the bottom for a lot of people and very high for a lot less people at the top. But as you said, some of these social concerns, I think, from what I've observed in the company, those are still consistent with at least the people that have been willing to talk to me with how they approach the economic inequality in this country. And yes, there is cash profit sharing, and yes, there is stock sharing, but the amount of benefits that you get from having a job that you're likely to have for the rest of your life, working in a company where you have a pretty decent say and control over your own work. There are these other aspects that you get out of the company that's it's not just, well, here's your wage. It's you're not being cut short.
Right.
So even in the case you are at the bottom, or you are, well, we can say that generally speaking, people who are at the bottom tier who are unskilled or freshly educated out of college, yeah, they're getting compensated more than they would. So I mean, there's that self-interest benefit that you get from another company, but as you go towards the top of that scale, there are other parts of the and it's not always convincing to a lot of people. There are other benefits you get from the company beyond monetary compensation that are imperative to the company's culture, whether it's strictly reinforced or not.
Right. And I think for on those issues, one of the arguments either way was, well, competition is really strong now. And there are huge companies buying up our competition, lots of money behind it. So how are we going to compete? And it seems like Chroma's done a good job. They are competing against those companies, and a lot of it, from what I've seen, is because of the way the company is structured, because of the way people are treated, because they stay here for a long time. You build up relationships with customers and companies, and so it's amazing when I think about it, when some of these mega companies, and we're still there. I mean, little company in Rockingham. And even hearing Paul talk about, oops, I probably shouldn't mention names, but even hearing Paul.
I'll be interviewing Paul, and him having a relatively important stake in the company, its longevity, and mentioning him is not an issue yet, because I'll be interviewing him too.
Well, I think that the future of this company is going to be based on those relationships with our customers and keeping really good employees that take pride in what they're doing here. It's that balance of trying to stay, make a profit and stay competitive, but also comes back to taking care of each other. I mean, you could have the best product in the world, but at least here at Chroma, if you didn't take care of each other, I wouldn't have my job. I wouldn't want to stay here. So we'd be like everybody else.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at other case studies in cooperatives and employee-owned companies, because there's ultimately always that pressure under globalization that when you get to a certain size, you're not just selling to those in your state, your region, your country anymore. To really compete and to really gain that edge and survive, you have to compete globally. Let's say in Italy, post World War II, there was a huge cooperative movement, and a lot of that was sustained because of laws that were being passed, tax laws, and then huge I mean, thousands upon thousands of small cooperatives organized with each other, and their company, the country kind of organized like that. But by the 80s and the 90s, you had big cooperative organizations like Mondragon in Northeast Spain that were huge regionally, that did have a huge impact in their growth was based regionally. But then globalization happened, and it continues to happen too.
Right.
So those pressures are very real when you get to a certain size. And I think thinking about the very specially developed products that Chroma has, and in the markets that they're looking for, you can't but compete globally.
Right. And maybe it's just the industry itself and what Chroma makes. I mean, there's competing for the instrument business and for larger scale things, but there's still this thought out there from a lot of the customers. Chroma is stable, and they care. Again, Chroma cares about their customers too, and it's science. So it's not. It seems like, well, the science drives the need in industry for this. So Chroma has been able to keep up relationships with the scientists and the doctors and the needs and finding out what they want, and then grow it into the instrument business. A lot of the competition comes in after the fact. Things are developed, or needs are developed, or filters are developed, and then they can produce a product that goes after that. I can't really call it after the fact, but
No, but it seems like, and this is somewhat consistent with what I've already learned about Chroma, is that because you have those relationships with these scientists at the forefront of science, and you're creating very highly specialized lenses and products for them,
Mm-hmm.
you're able to, or Chroma is able to push in that very new frontier where these other companies, when they're getting bought up by larger organizations, the idea then, to cut costs and increase profits is to be able to mass manufacture and put as little human labor and customer service into the product and reap as much profit. And with that, what you're saying, after that fact, is that they're trying, that mass production requires less intensive involvement with forefront scientific development.
Right, and Chroma seems to be able to do both to some extent, which is pretty exciting, I think. I hope it doesn't end. And the other thing is the employees, probably because they're so involved in the quality of the product, are also really willing to learn. I mean, like Paul or some of the other people learn what's really needed. They're educated, or they educate themselves on what's needed, and they're not just being told what to do, what's needed. So it's kind of a partnership with the first end, the scientists, and then it goes on to the companies and the instrument developers and things like that.
So when did you retire?
I'm so bad with dates. This is what I did in court too. I think May will be my 4th year or 3rd year.
Oh, okay. I guess because the only other founder I've interviewed is Frank, and he cut out in 2005, 2006. So
No, I was
maybe about 2011, 2012.
12, maybe, yeah.
Okay.
I just, time just means absolutely nothing to me anymore, other than that it goes fast.
So I'm under the impression that Paul has been retiring for 20 years.
Yeah, he keeps threatening that, and I think.
Threatening, as in like he's threatening to retire, as in his service, as you won't help Chroma. That's a very confusing statement.
He keeps saying that he's going to retire, and there are all sorts of implications for that, for me personally. And but I decided to leave. Well, I had a personal issue with an animal, but also it seemed like the company was going beyond me, my abilities.
Okay.
It seemed like we were putting in, an all-new database and I didn't understand any of it.
They're actually putting in a whole new financing database starting today.
Really?
because I don't think that database or the systems they use has changed for 10 years, and they're now doing all of that.
Right. Well, the whole, what do you call it, the NPR system, MRP system?
Yeah, I think that's what they're changing.
Okay, well, that has been going on for years, and we never, I don't think they you still even really have the whole manufacturing thing done. I mean, we were working on it for years when I was still here, so.
Wait, is that, what is the MPR, MRP?
Manufacturing.
Does that have anything to do with documenting the processes in manufacturing?
And timing them and all of that.
Yeah, from what I understand, there are pressures from customers and clients. I know HR is currently working on doing that, and there's software that they're trying to develop, and there's growing buy-in, particularly from the engineering team, to do that. I mean, so there's an interesting roundabout on how that's developing, because while she's developing the software, you have to have the engineering overhead people to also buy into it. But then because they're not the person that is always doing that or training other people, they each have some sort of responsibility, but not total final responsibility of telling the trainer on how to train people, and then the trainer has to train people. But then there is somebody, like, there has to be some orchestration of in that work process for somebody that's not the higher engineering team people to do that. Simultaneously, they're also now have developed an engineering manager that is going to have organizational power, and what that power looks like, I think, is limited in the sense of direct decision making and control over other people. But it's in the sense that you've been talking about, that there is been this difficulty of decision making, communication, who has what power and who can do what. There's, I think, so you have the board. They're developing and working to finalize the charter on that of the board now, but I've also heard that's been going on for quite some time.
Yes.
They've settled on 5 chief executive positions with 3 people filling those. They're defining their purposes, and those job positions are also being fleshed out. But then, as a process I see then is that that's from the top down, but at the bottom, within the work groups, there is that process of documenting and tracking and timing and formalizing work instructions. But then they're pushing up too to make sure that work groups are organized to some management structure that's then organized the C-suite and then the board and whatever that looks like. Because cooperatives and employee-owned companies, how to retain respect for collaborative democracy and wanting a flat structure. When you get to 100, when you get to 50, you can manage it, but when you get to 100, when you get to 150, when you decide to add $19 million addition to your building and add another 30 or so jobs and eventually do break that 150, these formal structures, whether or not they're traditional management, are literally required, because these breakdowns will become much more apparent and things will slow, and
Right.
God knows what that could do.
And there have been, there have always been different external pressures or reasons for setting up. Now, when I was here, what I found was that they were very disconnected. I was always involved in a lot of the audits from our customers, and a lot of that was based on documentation, the way they wanted it done, they wanted proof, they wanted to see. So, I kept my stuff, but throughout the company. But that didn't always connect with what Chroma was doing and their documentation, and for those
what documentation that existed.
Right, and for those purposes, or for purposes, and then there was then sales had different requirements that they wanted to see happen. Nothing ever really seemed to connect. Like, we're doing all these little bits and pieces to satisfy different concerns, both for the bank or for our customers' audits, or for engineering or manufacturing. So we were reinventing things a lot, doing the same thing in different ways, but I had no idea that what I just did was being done over here in this department or whatever. I'm becoming very scattered right now. Now, what you're talking about is happening is sort of, when I was here, they were still working on a manufacturing program that was purchased. It was like, I think, the 3rd one that was being tried. for, mostly finance wanted it. They wanted to be able to track costs and time and all of that, which different departments just couldn't make happen, and different people couldn't buy into. So I don't know if that's what I heard. That doesn't exist yet. But the HR wasn't really involved in anything at that time other than the very basic things like tracking people's hours or something like that, but it wasn't down to the minute. So, and I think what we kept saying was, well, we're very different. We don't fit into any of these categories that are being offered out there for our documentation and what we really want to get out of it. And it's kind of left there. So I'm not sure if...
That seems to be relatively consistent with, you know, in the case of, you know, I'm comparing a lot of Chroma to this etheric, non-existent, perfect corporation that is hierarchical, that does all these things in these efficient ways, as, you know, literature tells us that they exist. In the case that you have a position on paper, within Chroma, it seems much more likely that whether or not that position requires or says all these other things, the people who fill them not only make what that job really is or what it should ends up being on paper, but they evolve it into, you know, where are their skills, where does their personality fit, what can they do for the company, and you know, this decentralization. There's obviously, you know, you take from Frank, there's this magic that exists. It's etheric. It's not tangible. That can't be defined. There is something that's informing the longevity of the company, that its continual growth. But as you've talked about in other interviews, have talked about, to implementation of systems and the perfect coordination, or even near perfect, because perfect coordination isn't going to happen, but the near perfect coordination between work groups seems to get just about there, but then it's like, yeah, it's not really what this company needs. You know, whether it's this work group or that work group, finance or QC, it's an interesting relationship.
Right. I'm not sure that's ever going to change. I'm not sure it really needs to, but I was just thinking, I can't remember what, again, we had these committees set up I was on, and we were interviewing some other employee-owned companies in the area that were in manufacturing. And the big difference was they were ESOPs, which ESOPs have their own rules that you have to follow, but also they were companies that were started by one or two very powerful people in the organization who were kind of trying to let go. So selling part of their business to the ESOP, but in almost every single one that we interviewed, they would say, oh yeah, well, you know, people's opinions are valued, we have suggestion boxes, we have, you know, all these things, we have votes, people's opinions are valued on how we do things, but in the very end, they all said, I make the final decision. And I think there were 4 of them. One was a tool company, one was a bread company. I can't remember that there was still someone there that would step in. They would allow things to go as far as they thought they could go, but they would still step in and make some of the final, very critical decisions. And that probably happens at Chroma too, even though we don't like to admit it. Maybe not just one person, but they never formalized who really, other than by selling the company where it has to be one person, one vote, and then there are things by law where you have to take a shareholder's vote where it's based on shares. Never really come down and confirmed who, especially in critical issues, who has that final say.
I have my suspicions, but it's not written into anybody's job description.
Right, and I'm not sure in a really critical situation whether that would happen. I mean, people have pulled together with very different ideas in some instances, I think, which was surprising. Even the court case was surprising. But Chroma is very different from almost any other employee-owned company as far as not having anything. Well, it's not an ESOP. Co-ops don't quite work once you're dealing with this much money, where it's always one person, one vote.
Have you heard of the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain?
Yes, I've actually read a whole lot about them, but
I mean, that's a complicated system with
Right.
with its own history.
right. But I'm not sure that. I'm trying to remember what it was. It worked for a while. The decisions were. Were there any high-tech companies that? I mean, some of the decisions here.
I mean, if you're
there
looking
were
for
banks yeah,
if you're looking for high-tech companies in the sense that they're like Chroma at the edge and the forefront of developing tools for scientific research, you know, I can't quite say.
No, you're right. It did work, but I think it was it came from a whole nother place, too.
What's it?
It's been Chroma versus the Mondragon.
Yeah, culturally, politically,
Right,
timing,
right.
very much different.
Right.
But that's an interesting part of the research into case studies within cooperatives and employee ownership, because the very legitimate cultural influences. So, I mean, the Mondragon. I mean, not that this is a very reductive statement about Mondragon, but they have succeeded because of cultural homogeneity compared to. There are degenerative cooperatives, and they degenerate because they reach heterogeneous cultures. There are people that they're hired not for their fit for the company, but they're hired for we've been experiencing this boom in our production for so long. We need people that can work. We need people to produce. And then there's some of the plywood co-ops that were in the Pacific Northwest. I guess between the 70s and the 80s, those were the ones that had succeeded the longest. Were culturally homogenous in the sense that there was a lot of Scandinavian heritage there. So that's one of the things that have informed longevity. But you had mentioned the flour company, and that's King Arthur, and ESOPs are kind of interesting because, as you said, they're employee owned, but there's still someone retaining power. And I'm not sure about the legal requirements for ESOPs, because I know the legal standing for them are primarily around how taxes have done, how ownership is done, but I'm not quite sure the requirements for actual management.
Right, and I'm not sure that there are requirements, and the companies that we interviewed were companies that we thought maybe were closer to what we were doing. I mean, you can be an ESOP like, was it SAIC or whatever they are. There's thousands of people, and yes, you're an employee owner, and I guess that means you get some of the profits at some point. But as far as your say, other than some major year-end votes, the daily say may not be there. And the companies that we interviewed were at least trying to give people a say or trying to get people to buy in. But when push came to shove, it seemed like, and this was just my impression, that there was still that one person up there taking care of everybody and saying, okay, no, we're going to do it this way.
Yeah, there's an interesting correlation between proclaiming and attempting to practice democratic decision-making and giving off the image, even internally, even suggests, even if the employee body who does own the company does believe, has X amount of say, that there's still that weary, handing off the torch, if you will, from one or two original founders to the company at large to making big decisions. Because, as you've been saying, even about Chroma, there is that, can this person in this work group make an appropriate decision about what's happening in another work group? Often claimed it's probably not, because as you get larger, going back to your experience when the company was small, you did a lot of different things. You found out what the company needed to do, and you were able to feel that out and do that. But when you get to 50, when you get to 100, with Hypertherm, for example, here in Vermont, when you get to 1,400, it's almost literally impossible for one person in one department or on the other side of the planet to have legitimate say. So that there are these relationships with democratic decision making that really, I guess there's fear, even in electoral politics, in states and other countries like us, not like us, but that also have similar democratic elections, that fear that the democracy isn't efficient in getting to the needs of the company, or to, to keep it continuing. Those are very real and very apparent, as you've kind of pointed out in different examples.
And I think one of the important things that is, it depends on what employees' expectations are of employee ownership. And I think Chroma tried to figure that out or explain it, and it changed over time. But even at Omega, you were given the sense it was not an employee-owned company, but you were allowed to vote on what Christmas present the company would buy for for the employees, what to have for lunch, where to have lunch, all of these
inconsequential things to the actual functioning of the company.
Right, and I think some of the companies that we interviewed, there was some of that, where people would say, oh, but I can put my suggestion in and someone is going to read it, which is great, but that doesn't really mean that you're having a say in operating the company. Or even at Chroma, we decide what holidays we're going to take, which is very important. You're recognizing different people's needs, and then you have to also figure out, well, what's the company's needs if we close on this holiday and everyone else is open, those kind of things. It makes you feel like you are having a say and you belong, but in the important issues, do you really have that much of a say? And I think that's what people struggle with here.
It's probably a little bit more difficult here because while there are personalities and people who those final decisions tend to fall in, there's no formal structure. There's nothing formalized or finalized to say this is the line of decision making. And I think there's probably some fear, whether it's here or in other places, of normal, hierarchical, strict, rigid, management and decision making structures. Yeah.
It's also how you perceive of management. I was constantly hearing, we're afraid of management, but because someone is going to be telling me what to do, and those things. But I looked at it more like management means that you're the one who's taking the ultimate responsibility for what you're told. Because I could say I'd walk around and ask people, even in the steering committee, I need a decision. So if no one really wanted to make that ultimate decision, they could be wrong. And if you're a manager, you can't just say, I did my best. That's it. You're ultimately responsible for making something happen. And I think that's a hard thing to do. And that you can't have a lot of people running around saying, this is what I think, but I'm not going to make a decision.
Yeah, I guess when
I'm probably not being very clear about that, but I guess I didn't see management, if it's good management, as bad. Mm-hmm. It means that, yes, I'm going to take in all this input from everyone, but it's my responsibility to make something happen.
Yeah, I think should have been clear about this before, as I've talked about management external to Chroma and then normative company structures, I've talked about it and demonized it a little bit because of the connotations you get from that structure in involvement in decision making. In the case of Chroma, when I talk about management and in employee-owned companies and cooperatives, management is not the same, because if the work groups are already collaborative, if you impose a normative management structure on it, it will almost completely eliminate it by suffocating it. But in the case of, at least what I understand about even the current engineering position that they're hiring for, actually I think it was filled internally, it's not so much, you've got a work group of 10 people and you've got a manager and you do what they say from now on. It's that manager they do a lot more coordination and collaboration. They do that communicative work, they do that organization work that is otherwise time lost. So, in the case that you had the steering committee, they were essentially, people that had some oversight here and there. They had senior positions here and there, and they try to, coordinate that. But, I don't know, the way the steering committee fit into the company structure in the past is different from what seems what they're doing now. So as I said, I think that the way they've formulated and are approaching imposing management now in the structure is to retain that freedom of decision making, that to retain autonomy that people experience in their own work group, but to also achieve that broader coordination and collaboration.
Right, and you need that, I mean, especially if you're dealing with the outside world, so you
Oh,
can't
yeah.
tell a customer, you know, who has precise specifications or the way they want things done. You can't just say, well, our guys didn't want to do it that way, but who's responsible for that?
Given the list of the people who said yay and the people who
Right,
said nay,
right.
it's just like, well, by unanimous decision, no, we
Right,
don't do that.
But yeah, and again, you know, the outside world probably is and should be affecting the way things are done here.
That's how you stay competitive.
Yeah, but not to the extreme. I mean,
Mhm.
because there's so much talent that you don't want to kill that talent in what they're doing. But the outcome needs to be, the outcome can be specific. How you get there maybe is not all that important, but if I'm the customer and I want this, and I want it done this way, I don't care what your process, although they do care. But, you know, your processes, if you can document them, I don't care. That's pretty much what they say. As long as I get what I want when I want it.
So this kind of jumps into something I've been thinking about, particularly when, you know, I've talked to Frank and after I talked to a few other people. When you were at Chroma, and I'm sure it doesn't seem it's changed much, but there is some forward thinking about, you know, informing the C-suite or the chief executive positions, as well as the new engineering manager position. How has Chroma in the past, I don't know, around forward thinking, how has the company thought forward, you know, 5-10 years? Has there been an attempt to plan forward and set goals and attempt to achieve them periodically?
I think there have been attempts. I don't know if they were ever realized. I mean, we had this 5-year plan meeting, 10-year plan meeting. Now, to be fair, some of it didn't work out because the technology changed or the needs changed or things like that. But as far as organization, I don't know that we ever, I mean, Chroma did plan for things like the building or having to expand, or tried to plan for that.
I mean, those are literal and physical constraints that if you don't plan for,
Right.
it'll be a whole mess. But I don't want to say less tangible planning because, you know, between 5 and 10 years, whether or not you have an extra 10 grand in your pocket from cash profit sharing is, you know, very legitimate. But I guess I'm thinking of, in the case of normative management structures, there, you know, maybe even higher at the board level, there is more direct involvement with coordinating. Well, we have all this stuff recorded, we have all this stuff projected, and then the delegation of this manager and this group and this, you know, whoever has these responsibilities meet these parts of this projected plan, and then you're reporting back, and then you're going back. So I'm kind of thinking about that.
Well, I'm sure that is going on, or was going on, and still going on. I probably wasn't a big part of it, but I don't think anything ever really was finalized or anyone came to a conclusion that people could agree with. And I may just been totally out of touch, but I just remember meetings talking about a 5-year plan or needing a 5-year plan, but I'm not sure that we ever did a 5-year plan.
Was that discussed at the board level?
Yeah, and I think it was probably discussed in other places too, like steering, maybe finance.
From what I understand with the restrictions insofar as the profession and law and finance, it seems like they would be more likely to have a 5-year plan, or more likely to be able to write one up. I might be assuming too much about, you know, other work groups and their involvement with long-term planning.
Yeah, again, I think I recall talking about the need for long-term planning, but not really having it happen, which could be very different now.
So in the case of looking at more specific historical changes that you've seen in the company, you've mentioned not only was there so there was the founding of the company, the lawsuit from Omega. There was it seemingly between, you know, getting to 20 or even 50 people in the company. In your tenure, were there other significant historical changes in the company?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't remember. Sorry.
No, it's okay because as I see it too, as I have been investigating structural changes, changes in, you know, even the size of the company, who the company is working with insofar as clients, those all incrementally, you know, over 10, 11, 15 years, what have you,
The pay structure was, I think, a big change, and I think it's changed at least once, if not more, since I've been here. And it's something that was struggled with from the very beginning, although I think everyone was much more intent on keeping it flat in the very beginning when there was
or as flat as possible.
as
Since then.
flat as possible, yeah. And I wasn't part of a lot of the different pay schedules discussions. But that was a big one. I don't really recall anything else. I mean, the need to grow, a lot of people really objected to growing, or there was a good number of people, and couldn't understand or see the need to grow. You know, we're a happy little company here. We're only making we can only do this so much. Why can't we just stay like this? And that's been something that was really hard to overcome, and probably still is. I mean, that was one of Frank's issues, was, you know, I'm happy, and we're happy. We don't need to do any more. But to stay alive, I think then other people realize that we do have to grow, and we have to change, and it's never going to end.
And so goes the cycle of capitalism.
Right. And who knows if Chroma's even going to be in the business of making filters over time. You know, technologies change. But one of the issues also, I think, that came up was that, is Chroma going to be ready to change with technology? Do we have other places to go, other expertise? So what if you don't need filters anymore? Do we have...
I know so little about the product in the first place that, you know, to answer those questions.
Okay, and I don't know if I should even be talking about this. So, you know, but
No, I think in the development, like it's imperative to think about, you know, where the company has been to, you know, the future is
Right.
also an important question. About
Well,
the company.
even with 89 North, which is part of Chroma, some people really object to even trying to keep that company going or having that company. But I think one of the thoughts behind it is, well, again, now we have some really good engineers, and if there's new technology out there, we'll be ready. We can do it. If you don't need what we're making right now, maybe there's these new things that are coming on, or new needs. We can do it. That's in the industry, in science or medicine or whatever.
I'm curious on that note, how the relationship between clientele, particularly, you know, at the forefront of, you know, scientific investigation, specialists and their needs from optics, and how that'll actually, because if they've been informing Chroma's growth so far, you know, if technology advances and changes, I would imagine that having, because some of the scientists I understand have only ever bought filters from Chroma, and that for decades even, and that their needs would actually continue to inform Chroma if you have a relationship like that.
Yes, I mean, I think that's true. I think, I don't know for sure, and I don't know what's been happening, but I know that Chroma gets a lot of heads up from people saying, hey, you know, we have got this new thing going, or there's new application, or a new need, can you help us with this? And sometimes I think Chroma can, and sometimes they can't. I mean, all along, just the very beginning of instruments was fun to watch, like a scientist who's out there, and he's going out into the bush, and he wants to be able to check water samples for cholera or whatever. So, but he doesn't have electricity and all of this. So we came up with something that he could carry in his pocket and use, and very simple, very simple. But then he went on to do other things, and he became a good customer. And then there's the whole space industry, which probably Omega does much more than Chroma in that telescope, although Chroma does some of that. There's the military, you know, there's all these things that...
My understanding is that Chroma will not involve their sales to I heard this from Paul, that they won't deal with military operations that are used external to the country, but Homeland Security is apparently on the board.
Yeah, and I don't know about that. I mean, we used to, certainly didn't go out and look for that kind of work.
Mhm.
There's some things you are not quite sure what they're being used for, or they could be used for multiple
Mhm.
applications. Chroma's products, when I used to help do shipping, even to ship internationally, we had to convince that customs or whatever that these products were not being used for weapons. To get into certain countries, you have to license your product, and our product did not need to be licensed because it was basically for medical research, although someone probably could use it to do something else with it. It's like peroxide. You could use peroxide for a lot of bad things too, but that's not what it was intended for, and if you don't buy a truckload of it. But yeah, I'm not sure I even remember what our policy was about weapons, other than I didn't come across it very much. Now, when I worked at Omega, they had two separate companies, one to deal with it and one to not. So there's one company where the employees were willing to deal with weapons components, and another company but they were really the same company, they just where the employees were, yeah.
Okay. So we're now at an hour and 11 minutes. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I'm sorry if I probably haven't been very helpful, but it was a
Believe
bad
me.
night.
Yeah, so for the record, last night Donald Trump is officially the president-elect with 289 electoral votes. Last time I checked, enough that Hillary couldn't and can't. Yeah, beyond that, no, I mean, what I've actually been finding in these interviews is that because your involvement as an employee, I mean, you worked in the company for, goodness gracious, more than 20 years, so very much it may seem inconsequential, or this happened, this is big in the company. All that ends up wrapping into the overarching aspects of this interview, or the interview project, which are your experience, the history, and the organizational structure and employee ownership culture. So what may seem not helpful was perfectly helpful, and it will add to the project for sure.
Well, good luck with the project.
Well,
I'd like
thank
to
you.
see when you're done.
I'm sure a lot of people will.